Last year, 130 employees of financial and legal institutions working within the City of London pushed away from their desks, turned off their computer screens, and walked to the lift, where they pushed a button that they had never pushed before. Bing! They dressed up in astronaut suits and stepped out into the lift, where they took a guided tour of the planet's life support systems. Their guides on this tour were the young people of the Golden Company. These are young people who live within a bee's flight's distance from the City of London, this massive center of international wealth creation, but who have been bypassed by this wealth, who feel uncomfortable on its streets, and whose shiny buildings are some distant Oz. But what we're there for is to act as urban pollinators for this city. We build the intersections where its diversity connects. One of those places that happens is on the roof of buildings of banks, legal institutions, where we deposit 60,000 bees in a hive in a wooden box. Now, we do that because bees are an incredibly important place to begin the engagement with nature. And what we see our role as doing is connecting two very different groups around a shared need. Those groups are the city employees who might cross the street if they saw one of our young people because they fear the hoodie. And they're interacting with the young people who have had their counterparts presented to them as some avaricious, greedy, occult elite that is, causing mayhem all over the world without paying taxes. But on this rooftop, they come together. And in fact, the power dynamic is a little bit switched. The city employees arrive as guests, and the young people are the ones with the know-how. They guide them on this tour to the center of the beehive. And what they both lack, their shared need, is access to nature. I was pleased to see that on Stuart's screen grab this morning, he had an article in the BBC about nature helps well-being. That's pretty much what I wanted to say about it. Because while we know its yields, its fruit, its air, its honey, we don't always have contact with its inspiring beauty, its ability to calm us right down and to foster creativity. And so the beginning of our conversation around nature, is around bees. And that's because they got a yield that we understand. We have honey on our toast and our tea. They also have a sting, which means that they demand respect. And to protect yourself from that sting, you have to wear a bit of bling. So it helps if you're engaging young people. And we also choose them because they have lots of lessons, not just for the young people, but also for the corporate entities. So bees have been around on the planet for about 20 million years in the honeybee form. In those 20 million years, they have increased the planet's capacity to create the conditions that make life. We've been around for 200,000 years, and we have depleted the resources and degenerated the planet's ability to create the conditions for life. We see acidification of the oceans, mass extinctions, and now we're heating things up at such a rate that the parameters within which life gets created are having to adapt almost more rapidly than they can. So what's the difference between these two organisms, between us and the bees? Well, the bees have got two features. One of them is that they're massively connected externally in a direct way, all the time, nonstop. For every pound of honey, a beehive has visited 2 million flowers. And they're constantly doing that. So they produce 1.9 million tons, and that was just for sale across the world. And this connection that they have, this immediate and direct connection, is kind of broken in our systems. In our systems, we have long, complicated supply chains, or as Glenn was suggesting, ownership chains, in which the connection between what we do and where it comes from, and the social and environmental foundations on which it's based, has been severed a little bit. And one of the solutions to the financial crisis has been suggested as rebalancing the relationship between financial capital and the investments and loans that the banks make. I think for the social and environmental problems, the same kind of concept applies, where we need to rebalance the relationship between what we do and the social and natural capital on which it builds. And bees are doing this, and their being constantly connected externally is one of the ways in which they manage to create value over and above their own needs. The other way they do that is by being massively connected internally. So every one of those bees that flies out and collects nectar is returning to the hive, and upon returning, it passes the nectar to that immediate bee that receives it. That bee passes it on to another bee, to another bee, to another bee, until within 24 hours, half of that colony has got a little droplet of that initial nectar within it. 30,000 bees get a drop of that nectar in 24 hours. And that is the beginning of a mechanism that means that the bees are constantly communicating, tongue to tongue. And that mechanism is what really allows the magic to happen, which is the unlocking the diversity inside the hive. Within the hive, there are about up to 20 different genetic streams, so 20 different genetic competitions going on. And what happens inside the hive with that competition is that it actually means that the hive is more resilient. So if they were all set exactly the same, when the temperature dropped, they would all down tools, stop feeding the queen, stop protecting the hive, stop foraging, just in order to disconnect their wings and shiver their wing muscles to heat the colony up. Because they're all set slightly differently, they only ever recruit the right amount of bees to deal with the current environmental conditions. Now, what the connection allows them to do is, as well as respond individually to environmental situations, because they're constantly communicating, if you were to sever the antenna, the bit that detects the heat in the bees, the colony would still behave as if they had those antennae, as long as you left a few bees still able to detect things. And the other thing that being massively connected means is that obviously if you've got huge range of diversity, one of the things you really struggle with is how do you hold this whole thing together? 20 different genetic lines, competing interests. And the answer is, again, in that mechanism of constant communication. Because as they communicate back and forth, they pass from bee to bee a queen's pheromone, which is a scent. And that scent conveys identity, and it unites them around that common purpose of building and nurturing that hive. In the hive, the bees aren't there for the honey. They're there for that engine of life that keeps going, that uses and produces honey. At the Golden Company, we see this as an analog with values. And it's not the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow that unites us, it's the rainbow. And we think that these transitions are quite interesting ones to make. When you think about the way that they're connected internally and externally, that's what gives them the ability to create value over and above their own needs. So they create, as I said earlier, 1.9 million tons of honey for sale every year. They also contribute to agriculture massively. So of the global agricultural production for human consumption, 9.5% of that value can be attributed to bees. In 2005, that was $200 billion. They also contribute to other species that thrive off the plants that the bees' pollination allows to evolve and adapt and reproduce. So what does that mean? How can we bring that into organizations? And working on the rooftops of these big corporates, you find a few interesting things. And so we've been invited onto these rooftops, often by people who are beginning to see their organizations or behaving as if their organizations were more natural than mechanistic. And so they're slightly more porous. The common characteristics of the people who invite us onto their rooftops are that they're connected across their organization, whether it be as chief execs who are reported to by every department, or they're in facilities and environment, which means that they steward the space through which everyone moves, which allows them to come into contact with everybody. Another feature is they're the key holders. Sometimes literally, they jangle in their pocket. Sometimes they just have the keys to the kingdom. They also have a strong sense of corporate identity, whether they're leading it or they've been there for a long time. Specifically, I'd like to talk about Andrew. Andrew works at Nomura, an organization that in 2011, 2012 had a £10 billion turnover and operates in all the regions around the globe. We had a £47,000 turnover in that same year, and we operate within the foraging distance of a bee, which is 3 miles. So Andrew is creating lots of value by building these connections. I won't tell you all of them, but the most important one that I see as a great example is when he brought us in to participate in their staff and family day. On that day, he brought together our young people who managed to sell the natural cosmetics with products from the hive that they make, market, and sell, to the families. So two distant organizations, two different groups of people coming together because it's one person over and above their tasks decided to get involved. So the outcome of this occasion was also that we sold seeds from St. Mary's, our community garden, as part of an Adopt a Bee package, which then raised funds for the organization's formal Through the Channels charity. Some of the staff from Nomura then came back to where we are based in Hackney and facilitated some mentoring with our young people. But the important thing for us is that the young people got paid for this. So they had their own little jar of nectar to take home in which they could use to then support and pass on the value within their own hives. We know that they use this to care for their siblings, contribute to the family pot, And then nurture themselves as well. So buying books for further education or music equipment for their growing careers. This is counting up now. So I'll leave you with, you've seen the bees on the rooftops. Now we should all get a little bit more connected. Thank you.